Hello, everyone out there in Pod Person Land. Today, we're going to be doing a little test video here. We're going to be trying to put together a little headphone amplifier. It's a kit that you can buy online for just a couple of dollars. I'll put a link in the description to the one that we're building today. Due to manufacturers and shenaniganery, there's no guarantee that you'll get the exact same configuration, but it should be pretty close, and hopefully this little tutorial here should get you at least going. Most of these things are pretty similar, so once you understand the basics, it's pretty easy to figure out what you're doing. So like I said, this is going to be the headphone amp that we're going to be building today. Very simple. You have a power in, which is on this one, it is selectable, I believe, between 12 and 18 volts. Then you have an input and an output and a little potentiometer here to take a look at or to change your volume level. So let's go ahead and take a look here. We'll take a look at the actual device that we'll be making here. This is the end product. It comes with a nice little plastic case here. This is how it's going to come to you in a bag of parts. So in this bag of parts, we'll go ahead and take that out. And so we'll go ahead and go through the parts. First off here, we have our case. It's in a few different parts. They have a little bit of protective paper backing that you'll have to peel off. Quite honestly, that's the most annoying part of this whole project, is getting your nails in there to peel off that little paper. The rest of this isn't too bad at all. So we'll put that off to the side. That's going to be the last thing we'll have to deal with. In here, we have our little mounting screws. So once we do actually build the box, we can, once we actually assemble the board, we can build it inside of the box with the screws and the little spacers and everything. Next, we have our integrated circuit chips here, ICs. Basically, these are kind of a shrunken down version of a lot of components put into a small package. You'll see these on a lot of different type of project boards and things that you put together. Then in the bag here, we have all of our mostly this is just resistors and capacitors. We do have an LED as well. And so, at least try and see that. So we have all of our resistors here. One of the hard part is to figure out which resistor is which. Sometimes they're labeled, sometimes they're not. So you do have to be a little bit careful about those. And I will point out that these are in fact the blue resistors. I found that the blue ones are a little bit harder to figure out the color code on, because now you have to do a little math when it's supposed to be a yellow band, but it's on a blue backing. Now all of a sudden it's a green band, and you just got to like figure that out. So, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of guesswork, but most of the time these kits have just enough components. So it shouldn't be too confusing as to which components to put where. Then we do also have our capacitors. There's a bunch of different sizes of capacitors. Most of them are going to be pretty much the same, but you do have to make sure that you put them in the right place. Now, the nice thing about most of these kits is that the board itself is going to basically tell you exactly what to put where and in what configuration. So if you look at, we'll hold up a little capacitor here. If you look at the prongs of the capacitor, you can see that one is a little bit longer than the other. That's because the longer one is what is basically the positive side. So when you are trying to figure out which direction these things go in, the positive side goes towards the positive, as you know, one would assume. Other thing you're going to need is your soldering iron. This here is my soldering iron. I will tell you, I have tried many, many times with the cheap little pencil soldering irons. It's really just not worth it. Get yourself a good soldering iron if you're going to do this type of stuff. It really makes all the difference in the world. Those little soldering irons, you know, they either break or they don't get to the right temperature or it takes forever. You don't know what temperature they're at. They're just annoying. So I highly recommend, you know, spend like good 50, 60, 80, $100 on a good soldering iron and you'll be a much happier camper. So let's get into taking a look at our components here. Right now up on the screen, we have the resistor list. The different resistors in there are 100K, 10K, 4.7K, and 47. So you do have to make sure that you take a look. It lists all the quantities, but you can see all the colors of the bands there as well. So we'll be taking a look and trying to identify each of those bands as we go. So we'll take a look here and see if we can't identify those bands. I'm going to go ahead and grab my spectacles here because it is very difficult to see these bands. So the first thing we're going to be looking for is we want the 100 ohm or 100K. It's going to be a quantity of 2. We're looking for brown, black, black, orange, and brown. So I'm going to be looking for, there's only, you know, this one makes it kind of easy. There's only one quantity of 2 packed here, but I'm going to double check and make sure that they are the right ones. So we'll go over here and we'll take a look. Oh, there we go. And we have brown, brown, black, black, orange, brown. So I'm going to go ahead and label those. Okay, so brown, black, black, brown, black, black, orange, brown. That is going to be our 100K, and there are 2 of those. So in here, I'm just going to take my handy little Sharpie and write 100, just so I keep track of those. Then the next one down in the list is the 3. So again, should be easy to figure out which one is that. The 3 resistors here should be 10K. This one is actually labeled 10K there, but I am going to go ahead and write it with my Sharpie as well, just to make sure. And also, it's always a good idea to double check. So this one should be brown, black, black, red, brown. And if I look at the resistor here, yep, brown, black, black, red, brown. So we have our 10K there. Next thing, we're going to try and differentiate our 47K, or I'm sorry, our 4.7K from our 47. So those are both 4 each. So we have 2 left that are 4 each. And these are actually labeled 47. And that one is labeled 4.7. So I should be able to just double check here. My 4.7. 4.7 should be yellow, purple, black, brown, brown. So when I look here, again, that yellow is going to be kind of messing with you because it's on blue. So it's actually going to look a little bit green on that first one. But I do have yellow, purple, black, black, brown. So that is going to be my 4.7, and we'll label that. And then we have, let's see here, last one should be 47, and we'll just label that and double check that we have yellow, purple, black, gold, brown, and backwards there. Yellow, purple, black, gold, brown. Yep. So we're all good there. All right, then. So next thing we're going to do is start lining up some components. When I'm building a board like this, I find the easiest way is to start with the shortest components, the components that are going to stick up the least on the board. That way, when you're setting everything up, you can flip the board over and you can lay all of the components flat there, and then they'll all stick up nice and be nice and organized for you. So if we look at the board here, it's going to be a little hard to see on the camera here, but I'll try and bring that up a little bit. If you can see, we have the 47, then 100, then 4.7, then the 10, and then the 47 again. So we're going to go through and do one of these sides and then a whole nother row of that. Then we do have a couple other resistors, or 3 other resistors that we got to throw in here. So we'll do all of our resistors first. So we'll take a look at how that works. And just so you guys are aware, I'm going to be setting up my soldering iron here at about 400 degrees, usually somewhere around 430 degrees, 420 degrees. Usually seems to be pretty decent for this soldering iron. I will tell you, in my experience, soldering irons differ. So just because it says it's 400 and whatever doesn't mean that's exactly what it is. So you'll have to, results will vary. You'll have to play with yours a little bit. So we'll let that heat up. While that's heating up, we'll go ahead and organize our resistors. So we're going to do that first row of resistors, and that is going to be, we need a 4.7 or a 47 first. So we'll take one of these 47 resistors. And resistors actually don't matter which way you put them in. They can go right or left. There's not a positive or a negative polarity to them. I do just kind of like to try and keep them as organized as possible, though. So the way I put in a resistor here is I'm going to take the resistor and I'm going to hold the resistor and bend the wires down straight. So I'll hold the resistor there and bend the wire down as straight as possible. Okay, so with that resistor nice and straight there, then we can go over here and insert that resistor into the board. So we have a 47. We're going to insert that into the board like so. Get that resistor nice and flat there. And then what I like to do is just spread out those prongs there. If you spread those prongs just straight out like so, that'll keep them nice and organized in the board, and you can just kind of go down one by one and solder all those points in. So that's going to be the first one. Now we need 100K. So I'm going to go back to my, let's see, nope, that's a 10K. So we need 100K. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my 100K resistor. Again, we're going to fold over the prongs there, and we'll go ahead and double check that we're on the 100 and insert that all the way. I like to push the resistor down nice and flat with my thumb there, and then just spread out those prongs. Try and keep them nice and tight. You don't want any gaps. You don't want the resistor sticking up at all. First off, it just kind of looks shitty. But secondly, if there's enough space and things can start moving around, components can actually start touching each other and you can get shorts. So you want to make sure that you're getting your components as close to the board as possible so that there's no wiggle room. You can't bump anything. Nothing's going to move after it's soldered in place. So get everything nice and secure there. The next one down is going to be a 4.7. So I'm going to grab one of my 4.7 resistors here. And again, fold your prongs or bend them downward. Go ahead and insert your 4.7. Always a good idea to double check that you've got the right one. Especially in this project, you have 4.7 and you have 47. So you have 4.7K and 47. Very easy to get those confused. It is just one color band difference. So I always like to just double check that I'm putting the right one in the right place. Next one down on the list is a 10K. So we'll take our little 10K resistor. Again, fold over your prongs. Go ahead and insert it into the board here. Come on there. There we go. Get it in the right holes there. Push the resistor down with your thumb and then just fold out those little prongs there. Last one in this row is a 47. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a 47. Again, make sure you grab the 47 and not the 4.7. Big mistakes there. Go ahead and insert the 47. Push that all the way down with your thumb, and then go ahead and spread out those components. So at this point, I usually like to solder these down before I move on. Otherwise, you just have a lot of things just getting in your way and whatnot. So we'll go ahead and flip the board over here. And let's see if I can get a little better. There we go. And so my soldering iron is all heated up and ready to go. And we'll dive in just a moment. Definitely helps to have some solder here. I just have a little, what is, I'm using 21 gauge, 0.032 diameter. It is silver solder, though. I do highly recommend silver solder. It is going to be a cleaner, it's cleaner to work with essentially, and it's more conductive and tends to last longer without having as much possibility of corrosion and things like that. So it is it's a little bit more expensive, but I mean, you know, you're talking like a dollar or something. It's not a big deal at all. But I would, yeah, definitely recommend going with the silver solder. But yeah, we're ready to go ahead and dive in here. So want to make sure that the tip of your soldering iron is clean. So basically just take the tip, go ahead and brush it off in your sponge. Your sponge should be nice and moist. It should not be soaking wet. It should not be dripping. It should just be enough to absorb some of that. I also do have a little copper scrubby here that works well to get some of that crap off the end. So now we can just go through each of our points and solder them in. Mostly, this shouldn't be too difficult to process. So just want to hold that there for a couple seconds and touch the solder. There we go. So when you do look at the soldering point, you do want to make sure that it doesn't shine over. Basically, if it looks very shiny and like a little ball on the end of your soldering point, it's probably not making contact with everything. Like one piece was hotter than the other, and your solder, you know, all sucked into one versus the other portion. So you want to make sure that the color changes on the solder and it looks like it sinks into the soldering point. So we'll just go through and solder the rest of these points here. And I'm not sure if you saw that one, but there was kind of like a little bubble of solder that once I put enough heat on, it just got sucked right in. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that solder to suck into that joint, and it should make a nice clean point. There you go. I'm actually going to turn the temperature up just a little bit here. I'm going to go up to 450 because these joints are taking a little longer than they should. Okay, so once you get all of your points soldered in there, you're going to take a little pair of snips here. I've got some snips here. I'm just going to pull up the prongs of each of these resistors, and I'm going to try and trim the leftover prongs as close to the soldering point as possible. So I'm just going to clip off all those little tabs one by one. If you do clip off a little bit of solder, that's no big deal. Just make sure that the point seems solid on there. You basically just don't want anything left over, anything to be able to touch any of the other components there. So if you get a nice clean cut there, all of your soldering points should be coming through to the other side. So you should see a little bit of solder bleeding through on the top side of your board, and then all of your points on the bottom should be nice and clean. So we'll go ahead and go through and do this other row here. Basically, it's going to be the exact same as the row we did here. So it's just going to be another 47, 100, a 4.7, a 10, and a 47 again. So we'll go through our resistors again and insert them and fold them over. All right, so we've pretty much got our resistors all lined up here. One more 47 to go. There we go. Get in there. All right. So now we can go ahead and solder down all of our points. Get a little more solder here. Okay. So once you get that iron to the right temperature, those points do go much quicker and much easier. The temperature does depend on the type of solder that you're using, and silver solder does require a little bit hotter temperature. So did have to turn that up a little bit. But we can go ahead and trim off all of those, trim off all the prongs. There we go. That's pretty clean. I can get that a little bit better there. There we go. Okay, so we got most of the resistors in here, and now we're going to go ahead and finish off. There's 3 more resistors on the bottom here that need to go in. We got a 10K, a 4.7, and another 4.7. Basically, this is a 2-channel stereo amplifier, so everything that we're doing is doubled. So that's why we have the 2 rows of the same exact resistor setup. So we'll take our 10K. Do be careful that when you're pulling the resistors out that you don't remove your labels. Otherwise, you got to go back and look at the bands, and that's annoying at this point. We got our 2 4.7s, and those will go in, fold over. Those will go right in like so. Push them down, fold them out, and one more. Okay, so now we can go ahead and solder these points in. You do have to be a little careful at this point to try not to cross your resistor prongs there. You don't want to have a bunch of them soldered in together. Just clean off the tip a little bit. Okay, so now that's all the resistors there. Since we have all of the resistors, we're next going to go to, usually you want to pick basically the next tallest piece when they sit up on the board there. So we have probably going to go with our smaller capacitors here. So we do have a few different ones. We have these tiny capacitors here. And again, the longer prong is going to be your positive. So take a look here. The there's also on these a little negative symbol on one side that has the shorter. You just look at your board. One side has a positive, one side does not. So make sure the positive prong goes in the positive side and push that all the way down. Then you're going to want the other capacitor here. So again, make sure you put the positive one into the positive side and push that all the way down. Then we can flip that on over, do the same thing we did with the resistors. Hold that component tight to the board with your finger and then spread those prongs out. Do that same thing with the next component here. Spread those prongs. Again, you kind of want to get it so that you're not overlapping those prongs too much, just so you don't end up connecting them accidentally. So we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and solder those points in. Cool, and we're good to go. On to the next piece. Next component is going to be these little guys here. I believe these are capacitors as well, just a different size and shape. These ones don't have a negative or positive, but I do, just for the sake of being OCD, like to make sure that the writing is all the same direction here. So the writing is face up. That's going to go right into these little slots here. Right there is one, and then we have another one right there. And again, hold it down with your thumb and spread out those prongs. Hold it down with your thumb and spread out those prongs. Okay, again, always get it as close to the board as possible. And we'll go ahead and solder those points. Okay, and then just go ahead. Okay, we're getting there. So the next components up are probably going to be your headphone jacks. These are actually surface mount though, so these don't necessarily have to be done now because we're not going to flip these over to solder them. We're going to solder them directly onto the surface of the board. So we're going to take a look here. This one is the input and this one is the output. So in general, sometimes these things are color coded. These ones are the same. So I have two black jacks here. So it doesn't matter which one goes where. Some of these, they are on this one. Nope, that one was black as well. Sometimes they're one is green and one is black. Usually green would be the input and black would be the output. But there's literally, you can just see these four little surface mount points here. This component will just sit right on top there, and you'll just solder those points right on down. So we've got one that goes there, and the other is going to go on the other side. One's in, one's out. So we'll go ahead and solder those points down. Oh, I should point out on the bottom there's two little pins here. I don't know how well you can see them, but there's just a little bit of a piece there that sticks out, and it will go into holes that are on the board, and it should line everything up properly for you so it doesn't move around or slide around on you. So just go ahead and get those little pins in the hole, and everything should line up properly for you. clean off your soldering iron every once in a while, and then we'll flip this around and we'll do the input. Okay, so we got our jacks in there. And next component, again, I usually just go in order of size. So next component up would probably be our little IC caddies here. So the integrated circuits here. This is the little integrated circuit. It's basically just a component that does a few different things in one in one little chip here. But these things are very sensitive. You don't want to solder directly to those. So there's these little carriers here that you'll solder into place and then press the integrated circuit chip into it. That way the heat from the soldering iron doesn't mess up the chip at all. These little caddies here have a little indentation in them. Let's see if we can see that a little bit better here. One side has a little cutout notch in there. So that notch is basically going to just tell you the direction. You'll see on the board itself, there's a little picture with a notch cut in there as well. So this little guy is just going to slide in those holes in that same orientation as the notch. We'll go ahead and do both of those at the same time. Both of those little holders. Okay, so we got both of those. We'll go ahead and flip those over. And these are actually probably the second ones I should have done because all the other components are a little bit higher. But it's not a big deal. What we're going to do is just take our little styrofoam here that came with the chips, and we'll hold that down, flip that on over, and that should keep enough pressure onto our components to keep them against the board and make sure that there's no gap. So with that little bit of propping up there, we can now go ahead and solder all those points in. Okay, and you can see one of these fell out, so we'll deal with that in a minute here, but we'll finish soldering the first one on. There we go. And we'll go ahead and put the other chip back in. Again, make sure that you check the orientation to make sure the little indentation is the right direction on the board. And then we'll go ahead and use our little styrofoam piece there just to keep some pressure on there. And we'll go ahead and solder that in place. Okay, so we got all of our points soldered in there, and we can go on to the next largest component. So the next components are probably going to be, actually, we're getting pretty low on there, almost done here. We do have the power supply. So the power supply is going to go right in there like so. And then we do also have the potentiometer here. The potentiometer is basically your volume knob. On this one, in the last couple ones I've had, the pins get a little bit out of alignment. So you just got to kind of bend those pins back. I think that's just a shipping thing. And then that will just press right in to your switch here. There we go. Look on the back and make sure all the pins are actually coming through and you didn't bend one out of place. And then we can go ahead and put the power supply back in. There we go. Flip them both back over. And now we can solder those points in. And then the 6 points on the potentiometer. And so those all look decent. And these I will go ahead and trim a little bit. So that potentiometer does, the prongs do stick out a little bit more than I like. So I will trim those down just a little bit. And then the power supply does stick down quite a bit more than I like as well. It does have these little holes here, so if you wanted to add additional power relays or stuff like that, you could kind of attach them in. We're not going to do anything crazy there though, so just going to go ahead and trim those off. There we go. Nice and flat on the bottom there. I don't bother trimming off the little pins from the IC caddies here. They usually don't stick out far enough to really cause any issues. So only a few components left here. We do have our chips left to go, and we do have our last 4 capacitors, and I seem to have misplaced an LED, which, okay. So next, we're going to go ahead and add our LED in. Same thing with the LED as on the capacitors. One prong is longer than the others, so that is your positive. So we're going to take a look at the board here. We see where the LED goes, and there's a little positive right next to that. So we'll make sure to put the positive prong in the positive slot there, and hold that in and fold over your prongs. There we go. And then we can go ahead and solder that LED down. And then just the thicker the component, the more heat it's going to take to solder it in place. So the thicker metal components, you got to be a little bit more patient with. The metal on the prongs of the LED here are just a little bit thicker than the prongs and the resistors. So it does take just a little bit more heat, a little bit more time and patience to get those to set in properly. But we'll go ahead and clean all those up. There we go. I don't like it. And last components here, last things to solder in at least, are going to be these big capacitors here. Again, capacitor, longer prong is going to be your positive. So look at the positive here. Longer prong goes in the positive. We'll go ahead and feed all of those in, and we can solder all of those in place at once. There we go. Hold them in place, flip it over, hold each of them in place, and spread out your prongs. Again, I do recommend that you kind of don't cross the prongs. So I like to go up and down on every other one when I'm doing these that are this close to each other. There we go. We'll lay that flat, and then we'll go ahead and solder each of those points in. Give myself a little bit more solder there. Okay, those all look good. So we'll go ahead and trim off the excess here. Get it nice and tidy. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the soldering that we have to do. Last couple things we got to do to tidy up here or finish up. We have to press in the integrated circuit chips. And again, these chips will have a little indentation on them, a little bit hard to see here. But that indentation on the top of that chip will indicate which direction it goes into, or goes into its little holder there. So make sure the little indentation is facing the indentation, and these guys will just slide right on in ever so easily. Sometimes you got to squeeze the prongs just a little bit to make them line up with the holes. Come on now. There we go. And when you get it, it should just kind of be held in there by friction. So it shouldn't fall out at all. Should be nice and snug in there. So we'll go ahead and press the other one in there as well. And there we go. And you should feel a little click as it goes into place there, and it should be nice and snug. So this is pretty much the whole board, and everything should be ready to go. I would highly recommend that you test it at this point before you go ahead and build everything in the box. Make sure that your components are all working properly and everything boots up and works, so you don't have to take the box apart to rebuild everything. I'm not going to go through that now, but I will test that outside of this video. Okay, so and now we get to build it into this handy little case here. So a nice little plastic case with all of its little doodads and whatnot. So as I indicated earlier in the video, we have our little plastic pieces here that are going to go to assemble this thing. And the most annoying part is going to be peeling off these little paper backings. So we're going to go here and tediously, one by one. Luckily, my nails are just sharp enough to get in there. So we'll peel each one of these off and discard. There we go. Okay. Nice and clean. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and build this guy into his box. So we've got our side pieces, our front and back and top. So you got two pieces here. One has a little indentation in it. That's going to be the top. So we'll set that to the side. This is the side that we're actually going to mount the board to first. So we'll get out our little screws here. And there is these little spacers here. They give you an extra one. Just break off the spacer. We're going to insert the screw into you're going to insert the long screw. You're going to go ahead and put down the spacer, and then you're going to put down the board. And then we're going to screw on one of these little risers here. And just get that hand tight for now. We're going to do the same thing on the next one. Break off your little spacer there. Insert your screw into the base. Put your spacer on. And then go ahead and get that into the board. And then we can go ahead and put on our little brass riser here. Again, just get that hand tight for now. That's fine. That's all you need. And we'll do the next one. Break off your spacer. Grab your long screw. Put the spacer in between the board and your base. Go ahead and insert the screw. And again, with the brass riser. And then the last one, break off the spacer. Put it between the board and the base. Insert the screw. Brass riser. Oh, got away from me. Brass riser. Okay. If you want, you can get the screwdriver out, but I usually wait until everything's together to get it nice and tight. So now we can put on our sides and our back and front. So this one, you just have to make sure that you get the right orientation here. On this kit, they did something a little bit nice, and they made the little pins that go in a little bit different sizes, so you can match them up just a little bit easier. So we'll go ahead and insert these guys, and nope, that doesn't line up like that. So I'll flip that around, flip it around like so. And yep, that lines up like that. We got access to the power. We've got access to the input, so that's correct. Then around on this side, this is the side that only works in one direction. So we'll go ahead and get that right in like so. Okay. Then the side pieces just slot right in. And then we can go ahead and add our top piece. Just kind of got to get all the puzzle pieces together there. And then we can go ahead and screw everything together. Okay, now is when I'd go ahead and just give all the screws just a last tightening there. Make sure everything is nice and secure. I mean, this thing isn't going to be watertight or anything, but at least we can hopefully keep things from falling apart as we're fiddling with things. And last couple things we need to put on here. There's a little screw that screws onto the front of the potentiometer here. So we'll go ahead and put that in place just to kind of secure things a little bit more there. And then the last thing, this little knob, you just press right in. I like to make sure that the potentiometer is completely one direction. That way I can see where the knob is going. Go ahead and press that knob in. And now it goes all the way up and all the way down. There we go. So that is our little project for the day. We've built a new headphone amplifier. Like I said, there's going to be a bunch of different a bunch of different companies that make these, depending on the when you order them, or just supplies and whatnot. They might change components on these things. They do often, but again, these boards pretty much just tell you where everything goes. So as long as you can tell the difference between a resistor and an LED and a capacitor, you should be able to put one of these things together. So yeah, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.